I'm man enough to admit when I'm wrong about something.
I've made a severe and continuous lapse in my judgment.
That happens incredibly rarely, but it does occasionally happen. Special shout out to all those people who thought I was going to be wrong about Indiana Jones 5 sucking absolute dick. To those people, I have only one thing to say.
Who's laughing now?
But, in this particular instance regarding Netflix's recent One Piece adaptation, I will admit I was indeed wrong. I, and many other people, were quick to write it off once it was first announced. We had, after all, seen Netflix pull this same song and dance many times before, be it with The Witcher, or with Cowboy Bebop, or Death Note, you get the point. Netflix, as a company, have a bit of a bad habit of getting the rights to popular IPs and then absolutely butchering them in adaptation, usually by giving them to showrunners who absolutely do not know what they're doing. And given that Cowboy Bebop was still fresh in the minds of many of us, like veterans coming home from a war, it's perhaps understandable why we're quick to write off One Piece in the first place. I mean, look, as far as anime goes, Cowboy Bebop and Death Note are perhaps two of the series that would translate the easiest to live action given how grounded they both are. If Netflix couldn't get something as easy as those two right, then what hope could they possibly have with something as zany and off the wall as One Piece? And then the show dropped, and people watched it, and they said it was good. So I watched it. It is indeed good.
I liked it.
Ladies and gentlemen, peak Peace has arrived. The character writing is on point. The actors are amazing in their roles. The set design is also phenomenal. I watched the whole show from start to finish utterly engrossed, and at no point did I end up cringing or recoiling from anything I saw. Netflix did the impossible. They actually did it. They broke the stigma surrounding Western anime adaptations. For as much as I could rave about how good Netflix's One Piece is, that's not quite what I'm here for today. Rather, I'd like to understand why Netflix's One Piece works and why so many other similar adaptations have fallen flat on their face. I've ruminated on the matter a fair bit, and I believe I've managed to come up with a few key reasons why Netflix's One Piece soars where other franchises flop in adaptation. So, why don't we go through them one by one, starting with... What exactly do I mean by sincerity? Well, to mention sincerity in writing is touching upon a broader problem that's been afflicting fiction for many years at this point. Here's a little thought experiment for you. I'd like for you to think back on any media you've consumed in recent memory and ask yourself if it contained any of the following elements. Was there ever any moment, such as a serious character death, that was almost immediately undercut by some sort of joke or piece of humor?
Anything he wanted. If he asked me to burn the world down, I would have asked him.
Be for vegetarian.
Or a moment where something that would be considered strange by our standards happened in the story and a character went, "Wow, well that just happened," or some variant thereof.
I'm seeing freaking dragons, and oh yeah, I'm talking to a cop!
Or really any instance in a story where a character basically leans against the fourth wall to try and undermine any sort of serious drama or pathos a story may have. That is what I refer to as a lack of sincerity in writing. Any instance where the creators are just deathly afraid that anyone will take their story seriously. And given how absolutely batshit One Piece is as a series, I was wholly expecting just about every scene to have some character rolling their eyes ironically about just about anything happening. So imagine my pleasant surprise when, right out of the gate, One Piece was wholly embracing a lot of the more abstract and bizarre elements of the franchise without any hint of irony whatsoever. Things like the snail phones, or the various costumes that the characters wear, or every detail about Luffy's earnest and headstrong personality, which is perfectly captured here from the source material. Really, anytime I said to myself, well, there's no way they're going to adapt that part of the manga, they went ahead and adapted that part of the manga. It would have been all too easy to include moments like, wow, we use snails for communication? That's kinda weird. Or, a pirate clown? That's kinda cringe, don't you think, my fellow kids? Slight side note, Buggy is the best part of the Netflix show. He's the best part of the anime too, but you know, they're consistent on that front too.
Surprise, shithead!
But Netflix's One Piece doesn't end up taking any cheap shots like that. It wholeheartedly embraces its source material, and as a result the storytelling is entirely sincere. They didn't feel the need to do anything stupid like, oh, I don't know, take the characters out of their high concept fantasy world and put them into like an American high school or anything stupid like that. If you think that the source material is too goofy or you're unwilling to take it seriously, then clearly you shouldn't be trying to adapt it in the first place. Respecting the source material sounds like an absolute no-brainer as far as adaptations go, doesn't it? But you'd be surprised by how many shows absolutely fall flat at this hurdle. There is, undoubtedly, an absolute epidemic of writers and directors in Hollywood who think that anything they do is automatically going to be better than their source material, particularly if said source material is a video game or an anime. I'm sure you know the types of people I'm referring to. The up-their-own-ass hipster douchebags who think of things like video games and anime as being lowbrow and inherently beneath them in some way. Do you happen to remember when Henry Cavill left Netflix's Witcher because he wanted to stick closer to the books and this was apparently an unforgivable sin in the eyes of the showrunners? Yeah, that's the kind of mentality we're dealing with here.
Fuck.
And it's made all the worse if, in some instances, the showrunner wants to somehow one-up the source material in some capacity, or right a perceived wrong. The best example of this that comes to my mind right off the bat is what happened to Gren from Cowboy Bebop in Adaptation. Gren, in the anime, is a fairly minor character who has two, let's say fairly distinguishing features about him. Essentially, he was a cisgender man who, as a result of some sci-fi medicine, ended up growing breasts. And that's really all there was to it. It wasn't particularly deep as far as storytelling goes, but then Netflix saw this and damn near broke their necks trying to one-up it. Where Gren, rather than being a man with a modified body, was instead reimagined as being non-binary. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm totally down with diversity. I'm not going to start frothing at the mouth over wokeness or pronouns or whatever other boogeymen are being cooked up this day of the week. If it was a change done just for the sake of making the actor playing Gren more comfortable, or if there was some major thematic or narrative significance to it, that'd be one thing. Something like that would be totally fine. But with how heavily the news of this reimagining was pushed in the media at the time, it gives the distinct impression that Netflix only really did it for the sake of point scoring. Or worse, Gren was seen as somehow being problematic in the source material and it was up to those brave, heroic Netflix writers to do something about it. You know, that thinly veiled racist contempt that so many people in the Western entertainment industry have towards Japan. That kind of sentiment is alive and well in decisions like that. Which makes it all the more impressive that Netflix's One Piece managed to avoid that same pitfall. While the pacing is different, the presentation of the characters is shockingly faithful to the source material. It's the author's vision writ large on the screen. Which then leads into the final point I wanted to touch on for the sake of this video. Collaboration with the author. One of the most distinguishing factors about One Piece is that Eiichiro Oda, One Piece's original author, was apparently heavily involved in the production of the show. Whatever manner of agreement Oda managed to work out with Netflix, it did give him some degree of creative oversight and presumably the power to veto any changes or additions he didn't want included in the show. And I firmly believe that kind of cooperation should just be, like, the norm when it comes to these adaptations. With one or two caveats at least. Someone can be an absolutely amazing writer, but that doesn't mean they know dick about directing a movie or TV show. Stephen King, quite famously, absolutely hated Stanley Kubrick's adaptation of The Shining. You know, that one movie that has the distinction of being one of the greatest movies ever made? Well, King ended up hating that adaptation so much that he took part in a TV series adaptation of The Shining where he had a much greater degree of creative control. Yeah, let's just say there's a reason why people still talk about Kubrick's version to this day and only ever mention the TV series to compare it to the movie and how much worse it is. The original creator should absolutely have a good deal of oversight and say in how an adaptation is done, but ultimately the role of director falls to, well, the director. Ideally, both parties should be able to work in harmony, but if that doesn't happen, well, either you get yourself a new director or you just scrap the project outright. Because, frankly, if you're doing such a poor job that the original creator is vehemently against whatever it is you're doing something wrong. And those, dear children, are the 3 tenets I believe any adaptation should try to uphold if they want to be in any way decent in terms of quality or success. And since One Piece has finally cracked the code, I'm sure those geniuses down in Hollywood will never make the mistakes of the past ever again.